welcome to the it's a prop tech panel, and we're calling it Energise, Invigorate, Systemic ESG Transformation. Gosh, big shoes to fill for 20 minutes anyway. But I'm Tom Hughes. I'm a commercial real estate partner. I'm part of our hospitality team and have been for the past sort of 13 years. I'm also very proud to have with us as part of the legal board for EEA. Joined by my panelists, who some of you, if you were in the breakout session that was downstairs earlier, you might recognise. So Naomi, Herbert and Michael of, let's get it in the right order, Drax, Beyond Carbon and Verdant, respectively. The breakout session was more of a sort of deep dive into each of your sort of respective businesses and the technology that underpins them. We're having a bit more of a macro discussion now, I think, and some of that can be guided by you guys because we can open it up for for questions, and Art might be able to deal with that as we go. But this is thinking really about the role of technology in a sustainable future. What are the barriers? What are the opportunities? What are the challenges? I always think it's quite interesting because tech gets lumped together quite often, and what you end up with, as we have here, is three very different businesses all being put together under an umbrella of prop tech, when actually, in their respective fields, there may not be much crossover in terms of the underlying engineering or software or technology that links them together. But what we're thinking about here really is about the system as a whole, and where does technology fit into that system. I suppose for the benefit of the people that weren't in this breakout room, that made the choice to go to other breakout sessions, it would be useful, I suppose, just to give maybe 5 seconds from each of you on the technology that underpins the organisations that you represent, I suppose. Do you want to start, Michael?
Sure. Verdant is a business based in Montreal, Canada. We are the leader in North American smart thermostat technology for hospitality in North America. So we're in about 2 million rooms there. We were recently acquired by big company that everyone knows, Blackstone, and part of that means that we are expanding globally. So we are here, hopefully trying to do the same in the UK and in Europe as we've done in North America, which is to help hospitality owners reduce their energy consumption in a significant way by making sure empty rooms are not heating AC unnecessarily.
Well, my name is Herbert. Tetzel. I'm the CEO of Beyond Carbon Energy, and our mission is to provide GHG-free heating and cooling systems for existing and for new buildings. This we do already with quite a track record since 2008, and whoever wants to be carbon-free heated and cooled can call me.
Very good plug.
And I'm Naomi, so my role is Head of Sales at Drax Electric Vehicles. Drax, if you haven't heard of us, we are, amongst other things, the largest renewable energy supplier in the UK. I can hear my voice getting louder. I work on the commercial side, so we support our customers' journey to sustainability through supply of power, electrification services, asset optimization, and smart metering.
Amazing. So Mark might not like this actually, because he was saying we really ought to be thinking about things in terms of opportunity rather than risk. But I sort of start out by thinking in terms of the sort of the technology journey that real estate might be going on. What are the barriers to the adoption of new technology? I know in terms of cost, historically people might think, oh, crikey, rolling out new systems, rolling out new tech, entirely cost prohibitive, we can't do it. But are we in a completely new era, and is that just old hat in terms of thinking?
I think it must be, whether we like it or not. I think technology is going to play a big part in this journey, this ESG journey. We heard a lot from some great vendors, sponsors about all kinds of great tools, great software that exists out there to help identify energy consumption, water consumption, and I've heard a lot since we've kind of been here in the UK and in Europe about changing behavior, learning how to manage a building in a way that is more conscious. But technology's out there to make our lives easier and to help complement that. And there's only so much that we can do on our own. And so I think the reality is to meet the types of goals that we set for ourselves, that our government set for us. We're going to need to implement technology to help us get there, and we need to get comfortable with it. And I think it was Frank with Accor Invest who talked about setting up, I think in conjunction with King's, some sort of training program where people get comfortable with tech and engineering, because I think whether we like it or not, it's going to need to play a big role.
But Naomi, Herbert, when you're having sort of new business discussions, where does the cost factor in? So is it the first thing that gets talked about? So is zero carbon heating and cooling, is it cheap? Is that the discussion you have, or is it much more nuanced than that?
To tell the truth, the adoption of new technologies is something for technicians. Nobody else understands that. What we face is when we come to a potential client, he doesn't even, I'm talking for 5 minutes and then it's like talking to a gravestone. And that's it. I lost him. That's the truth. He has no understanding for that, what we are doing or what we are looking for and where our goals are. I'll give just one small perspective of this whole technology range. We have district heating systems. District heating systems supply hot water. They supply hot water 12 months a year. For what? 9 months a year, we get the hot tap water as a gift from the sun. Why does any district heating system send us hot water all year? Second issue, I promise you, there's no building where people are in where we need high temperature supply. They send us the water with 100, 110 centigrades. When we supply buildings with heat, maximum temperature is 45, 48, nothing more. So if you rethink now what problems the district heating provider has due to his investment that he did in the last 70 years, how should he shut down his business and change that to any kind of low temperature supply? So when we see technology developments, and they come faster and faster, before they came in Olympiads, then they came in years, now they come monthly. So I know exactly in 20 years I'm going to be out of business because someone else is going to invent something, then they don't need me anymore. I only want to bridge this period till this guy invents the best solution in 20 years.
Well, that's an interesting point because, Naomi, you talked earlier about the mobile phone industry and you said, technology and EVs, when you think about what happened with the first gen of phones, nobody sends SMS anymore. But is that fear of obsolescence a big barrier for your organisations in terms of bringing new technology into real estate?
So for mine, I think it's a number of things. I don't think it's necessarily the technology. I think it's more an education piece for EV charging. I think people back in the day kind of thought EV charging is just a socket on a wall. And then suddenly thinking about all those things that have to go around it. Well, how do we know who's using it? Who's paying for it? Who's looking after it? How are we getting the stuff in the first place? What do I need? There's so many different pieces of kit out there. What's a back office? How do I get data? There are a number of different areas to look at. And I think I spoke earlier about some of those barriers to companies is that initial thought about, well, where do I even start? Who in the business is going to take control of this and run with it? And we've all got these different priorities with what we want out of it. So for me, we did some market research on the fleet market particularly, and those businesses. We spoke to over 400 different fleet professionals and wanted to see from them the biggest driver with the electric vehicle market at the moment is that fleet company car. So I mentioned earlier, 1 in 6 of all new vehicles in that space are fully electric. And yet when you look at the infrastructure side, only 48% of companies have actually started putting in some infrastructure. 91% know that it's coming the next 5 years. When we look at the mandate, we look at legislation that I spoke of earlier and how by 2035, 100% of all new cars will be electric. So they know it's coming, they know they have to do it, but where do they start? And price, I think, is a barrier. I think, when we're looking at purchasing anything, we're looking at price and we're saying, well, how do we know what that costs and where is that coming from? There are different things we can do with that. So we can do leasing, we can take that out of different budgets, we can work with CapEx and OpEx and make that work for businesses. But really for us, the next big driver around it is having that hold my hand through the process. Tell me what I need, tell me how I need to do it, and how can I make it happen effectively. And also that fear, I think, of kind of jumping in, doing it wrong, costing a lot of money, and then going, right, well, what happens now?
Yeah.
So I think there are a number of different barriers in my area, and the conversations, I've been involved in this space since 2010, and the conversations I was having back then and the conversations I'm having with customers now haven't really changed very much, which is really interesting. So I think for me, in my head, we're really far along, right? And we've got some great technology, and we've got some really fantastic solutions that will do all sorts of different things for lots of different scenarios. And we can really make that bespoke, and we can really work individually with customers. But actually, the understanding the education piece is so important first, and making sure that it's right and that we're doing it in the right way, whether that's in phases, whether that's a rollout system. It's that complete strategy and that planning and design phase, for me, that's just key.
And I suppose if you're at one end of the spectrum in terms of your infrastructure, you could go all the way back up to making sure the national grid is suitable and settlement
absolutely.
design. For Verdant, are you at the other end? Are you a sort of infrastructure light model? Is that kind of a string for your bow?
Exactly, and that's what we try and do, is we try and say, this is going to be kind of a light project, a light retrofit, something that should not impact the day-to-day all that much. But at the same time, kind of tying back this piece on education, look, if we're honest, we have a lot of customers, and there's a spectrum in terms of system performance, and oftentimes the system performance is very much dependent on the people that work at the property. It takes a certain minimum kind of, I'm going to pay attention for our system, and I would imagine for all of our systems. And as long as you kind of pass that threshold and you have a staff that's engaged, somewhat knowledgeable, showing up to training every now and then you're in good shape. We're not trying to create technology in here that is not usable or out of reach, but someone's got to pay attention. And I also appreciate that in the world of post-COVID and staff turnover, that might be easier said than done. But in our world, that's often the key between success and failure, is just making sure that that the staff is engaged, they understand what we're doing, and maybe baking that into some sort of incentive. I was having a conversation with a gentleman from Westmont Hospitality that might be here, and we were talking about that. We were talking about incentives for management that are tied to goals related to profit and CO2 reduction. Somehow that has a cool way of getting people involved.
One of the zeitgeists you sort of inescapably end up talking about when you're talking with, to tech-focused businesses, regulation. We were talking either on that session or after the session about, the humongous shift in well, you're probably better than me to talk about it.
Yeah, so regulation in the EV space is a little bit different, because I think what's happening now with the regulation legislation here is we're almost going back and backfilling. So we're filling holes, going, actually, this has happened. It's happened at such a fast rate that we now need to go back and change that. We need to adapt that. We need to put something in. Smart charging is probably a really good one to think about. So smart charging regs came out last year for charge points. And basically what that meant was that every charger had to have a connection to a back office. It had to be smart, and it had to not only be able to give data, so we can receive data from those charge points, but we can also control it. We can control it remotely. And that's key, going back to D&O grid, for them to be able to, when we have this huge amount of infrastructure all plugged in, all these vehicles plugged in and taking a charge and consuming a lot of power, being able to control that and ramp it up and down, switch it on and off, be able to not have power surges with everybody plugging in at the same time, having a delayed response on the charger. These are all things that yourselves as consumers or people putting kit in the ground don't necessarily have to think about. That's for an expert to kind of think about and come in and take care of and tell you how it's going to work. But equally on top of that, it's then managing that with a good driver experience, because that's absolutely key. The drivers have got to be on board, they've got to be involved, and I talked earlier about the difference between the early adopters and the mass adoption phase, and how where we're moving into mass adoption, there is much more convenience and speed and requirement, and I want it now and I want it fast. So how do we balance those different things? And that's where it gets really interesting for me.
But also the susceptibility to the political agenda. So Drax, obviously the shift in the requirement that all new vehicles from 2030 were going to be 100% electric to 2035. I mean, that must have played out.
I think, I mean, for us, it was a bit disappointing that from a government perspective, it was a shift in that focus, because we're all trying to get to an end goal, right? We all know how important it is to decarbonise transport. But actually, when you look at the underlying figures, so 2035, it's 100% of new vehicles. 2030, it's still 80% of new cars will be electric, 70% of new vans. So in terms of that percentage growth, and then when you look at the market and you study that and you see those month-on-month growth registrations, it's incredible how fast it's actually moving, and it's trying to keep up in the background. So already in the public space, there's been 1,500 additional public EV chargers go in this year alone, and we're now over 55,000 public chargers out there. That's without all the workplace, the home chargers. So I think when you're an EV driver, and that behaviour shift and that behaviour change, we've heard lots around behaviour today. And it is absolutely key. And it is that difference in behaviour that drives what's going to happen at the end of it. Excuse the pun. But the behaviour change of an EV driver from an ICE vehicle is completely different. And being able to charge while you're doing something else is key, because that's how I charge. You know, I never think about having to go somewhere to put fuel in my car. It's always happening in the background while I'm doing other things. And having that infrastructure and the right infrastructure in the right locations, and being able to utilise that for yourselves, being able to turn that into some kind of revenue stream, being able to attract new customers, being able to have them there using facilities for longer. These things are going to be key, I think, in this space moving forward.
The behavioural change was something Mark picked up on in one of the previous panels. He said, so much of what we hear about is about data, but fundamentally we don't care about the data. We care about the behavioural change. But from a tech business proposition, presumably data is incredibly key to the proposition that you offer. I mean, is that right, I suppose, is the question.
I mean, no question about it. Before you can solve the problem, obviously you have to identify it. Again, we're learning about the landscape here, but in North America, we've seen so many examples of legislation that have come in which have stiff penalties associated to them. In New York, for example, there's a law that was passed a couple of years ago called LL 97 that basically says if you're over some threshold of energy consumption, you get a big fat fine. But these properties don't have any type of systems in place to tell them how much they're consuming or where they're over, and everybody's scrambling to find good carbon software. So no question that the data is the place to start, and then we can have a debate about how much of that needs to get fixed through behavior, through software, through hardware, through tech. But first, you got to know what the problem is.
Yeah. We talked about earlier. I suppose there's a slight dichotomy between whether or not an asset that is sustainable is going to trade at a green premium, or are we still talking about brown discounts? In terms of the role of technology in that, is it something that you think about? Are we getting to a stage where we know that a building that is grade A has got to have a certain amount of tech, so actually it's just par for the course because it just has to comply, it has to have all of that in it, or are you actually seeing a sort of an attribution of value to the tech that you offer?
Yeah, again, different landscapes. So here we're learning about this idea that it's very difficult to trade real estate unless you have certain energy standards or thresholds. We're coming from a world where this was just about dollars and cents. Hoteliers that were buying and selling hotels we're reducing their energy costs so that they can increase their EBITDA, so that they can get a higher multiple. So oftentimes these decisions are great for sustainability, but the really successful ones are rooted in sound financials, good ROI, reduce your energy costs, increase profitability. So, you know, we're used to talking to hoteliers about, you know, every dollar of OPEX saved is, you know, I don't know what hotels trade for in the UK, but I don't know, 8 times, you know, EBITDA. So it's sound financial first, I think.
Is that a similar sort of outlook?
We are working with our clients on flat rate models, where the tenant has heating and cooling included in his rent. And when you think of such concepts, suddenly you'll see that the costs that have been paid before to the energy supplier suddenly show up in the rent. Well, you know exactly what that means for the value of the real estate. So this is for sure crucial on the economic side.
It's a very cute ringtone.
I thought we got a bird of paradise in this behind you. So one of the questions I wanted to ask is about integration and how, and Michael, you've made this transition from the sort of transatlantic now coming over to Europe. Do you see different attitudes here to there in terms of what you're used to seeing and approaches?
That's a hard yes. You know, to the credit to everybody here, I mean, I think the idea of being sustainable is much more ingrained in the British and European culture. We're behind in North America when it comes to that. And again, people are still making choices, but they're rooted in financials, which is not a bad thing necessarily. But, you know, the idea of, I don't know, lights being on in empty space in the UK or in Europe is completely ludicrous. That mentality is not there in the US and in Canada. Maybe we've been spoiled for, you know, cheap energy and loose legislation for a long time, but I think we're getting there. You know, I was recently at a conference in Boston where some of the topics that were probably discussed in rooms like this 5-10 years ago are being discussed now. So it's happening, but North America is behind when it comes to the kind of ESG culture, for sure.
Herbert, Naomi, do you see similar things, either in terms of geography, or I think that the hospitality industry has always been slightly more forward-thinking, but do you see different sort of cultural approaches, I suppose, to the adoption of technology and its role with sustainability elsewhere within the real estate industry? I
think for me, it always goes back to strategy. So when I look at the European strategy for EV charging, the way that they've rolled out their network, they've done it very, very streamlined, it's very consistent. Interoperability, roaming, you know, that's just standard throughout Europe. In the UK, we're a bit more fragmented. And I think, again, this is where the regulation legislation has come and become a bit more fragmented as well. If you think back to cash point rollout, or broadband rollout, you know, cash point rollout, if you had a Lloyd's card, you could only go to a Lloyd's cash point and get money from there. Whereas then suddenly you can go now to a Halifax and a Barclays or wherever you need, you've got that system. And that's what EV charging should be like. You know, in the earlier days, you had to carry around 12 different cards to access different networks. And you had to try and work out where they were. And then when you got there, you had to keep your fingers crossed that they were actually working and that, you know, somebody was taking care of them. We are getting much, much better at that. And I think this is where this regulation is coming in, particularly with the public regs that are coming out in November this year. That is more about that driver experience. It's more about that uptime. It's more about reporting. It's putting more onus on the charge point operators, on the manufacturers, that they have to get the solution right, which is great. That's how it should be. And making sure that, you know, it's fit for purpose and it's doing what it needs to do. And I think that's also reflected in the grants and the incentives that are out there. I think previously there was a blanket grant, the home charge grant. When that first came out, you got £1,000 to have a charge point go in. You didn't even have to have a car. You could just have a charge point on your house, which when we think now, you know, that's actually quite ludicrous. Whereas now what we're looking at in this slightly different space is we're seeing grants where we need them. So how can we innovate technology to work for those people living in homes that don't have driveways? How can we make that work for them and really kind of roll it out properly and sustainably and effectively? effectively. So, yeah, I think it's interesting.
Well, if your question was before that, do I see a difference in asset classes regarding do they approach quicker or not so quick sustainability issues? I don't see the difference in the asset classes there. But I would like to answer to something what you said before. If I talked to a potential client 5 years ago, he would say, hopefully we don't have to match any sustainability goals. When I talk to them today, they say, it's not a question if, it's only a question when we have to meet these goals, but we are as stupid as 5 years before. We don't know how to do it. Because the informations they get from all sides, they are so confusing for them, because what they don't do compared to us, they don't think of energy, or they don't think of GHG, or they don't think of electric vehicles 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They have so many issues on their hands, so many items on their task list. One of them is somehow an issue called carbon-free or sustainability. And they get something out of the news, out of the TV, from a friend. Companies, consultants contact them. They don't know where to, you know what they are looking for? Hopefully, politicians are demanding something from me that is binary clear. Make this. That's what they are asking for.
And I don't think they're going to get that. And so I think where we can help is we can be that translator. And it is confusing. It's confusing to us, and we're supposed to be experts in the field. So I think where we can play a role collectively is to help translate that and to say, okay, I'll help you decipher this Rosetta Stone of requirements. This is precisely what you're doing wrong, and this is how you need to fix it, and these are your options. And maybe they'll choose one of our technologies, maybe they won't. But I think that's what's going to be needed. Otherwise, it's going to be, a lot of people trying to do a Rubik's Cube, and it's going to be tough.
Yeah, exactly. No, I completely agree. It's that consultancy approach. It's that understanding the business case. It's understanding the requirements, and then finding the right solution to fit.
Yep.
That's a really good place to make.
Thank you very much to our panelists for doing not one but two. Thank you.